What's up, everybody? It's time for our iYouth service. I am so excited about this message. This message is going to blow your mind. Get yourself a notebook, a pencil, some way to take notes because you're going to want to remember what we're talking about today. It's going to change your life. Seriously, though, I know I say that every week, but I really mean it this time. So you need to get everything you need to do so you can pay attention. Go get your parents. Tell your parents to sit down and watch this message with you. It's going to be a short message, but it will be beneficial for you, for your family, for everybody. So get them, sit down, pay attention. This message is really, really good. All right, let's go into this. I don't know about you, but as a young Christian, I hear so many young Christians coming up to me saying, "Pastor Matt, how do I live this Christian life? I'm not really sure how to do it. How do I become holy? How do I walk in the true call of God on my life?" And a lot of young Christians, they go through things like, "I'm so willing to accept Jesus into my heart. I'm so willing to say, be the Lord and Savior of my life." They go to the altar, they cry, they have a moment, and then they're like, "I don't know if I can keep living this life. How do I live this life?" And then they feel guilty every single week if they're not measuring up to what they think they're supposed to be doing. And every single week is becoming more and more a drudgery and a pain and a weight. And eventually they either have to make a decision. Do I pretend that I'm doing well and just keep coming to church? Or do I just say, "I can't do this God thing right now. I think I'm not good enough." And they walk away and they just chase other things. Here's the good news. There is a way. I think that sometimes we over-spiritualize so many different things. Serving God, yes, you have to have the Spirit of God. Yes, you have to be led by God. Yes, there is the invisible aspect of serving God. But there's also the very, very practical. About some things about serving God, you just have to make some clear, rational, logical, wise decisions. And that will also impact your spiritual life and the direction of your entire life too. So today we're going to be talking about doing some of the practical things, a way to help you walk the walk that God has caused you to. And here's the thing. How many of us have done dumb stuff? You do some dumb stuff. Let me give you an example. I'm going to use one of our youth stories. Okay, story time. So there was a youth, and he texted me, and he goes, "Pastor Matt, I am so thankful for one of your messages. I just listened to it. I almost made a bad decision. I almost got into a relationship that I knew I wasn't supposed to get into, and I just want to thank you so much for what you've done for me and the teaching that you brought. God is so good." And I texted him back, and I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome. What message was the thing that really impacted you?" And he goes, "The wisdom one, the one where you said, in light of my past experiences and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? I almost got into a relationship that I knew was not right, but when I realized I needed to ask, what is the wise thing to do in order to walk into the future God has for me, I said no. And I pursued God." And that was on Wednesday, and I was like, awesome. I moved to tears. I'm like, God is so real. God is moving in these young people's lives. What a great decision. Then Sunday came, and while we were in Sunday, there was a service going on, and we were all sitting up in the balcony. I went to use the bathroom because I drink a lot of water. And as I came back, I got a text from someone that was on the stage. He was looking up to the balcony. And in the balcony, he said, "I saw a young man kissing another girl during the service, so I had to tell him to stop." I texted back and I said, "Oh, there's no way. None of my youth that have been students and under my tutelage would ever do such a thing." And he goes, "Yes, they were. I had to correct them and they stopped." And then I go, "What did he look like?" And I looked back, and following the description, it was the same guy that texted me on Wednesday that he was so happy that he sidestepped a dumb decision, and then he was doing the dumb decision 3 days later. How many of us can identify, though, with that story? You make the decision to want to be wise, to want to do the right thing, and then you get excited because, yes, you really meant it in the moment, but then a few days later, you do something dumb. What do we do about that? All of us do that. How do we solve this problem? Let's read a couple verses, and then we're going to get into the practical. How do we do this? Ready? 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. This is an older guy, Paul, writing to a young student that he's mentoring called Timothy. And he's telling him, this is the verse that you hear in every single youth service ever, every single youth camp. If you're going to hear one verse, it will be this verse. Let no one despise your youth. And everyone's all like, yeah, don't despise being young. Don't think you can't be used now. God has a plan and purpose for you now. You can live now. You can do now. You can walk in favor now. You can be powerful now. And it's all true. But look at the rest of the verse. You have to not just despise your youth, but you have to be an example to the believers in word, in what you say, in how you act, in the way that you love, in your spirit and in your faith and in your purity. It is an extremely high calling. And everyone will come to the altar and say, I want to be an example. I will not despise my youth. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to be a light to the world. Send me out, Lord. Look no further. I will go for you. And there's just the music's playing. Everyone's crying. Everyone's hugging. It's an amazing time. I'm crying. I'm like, go generation into the world. Change it. But 3 days later, you might find yourself right in the thing that you said you left at the altar. What do you do? So here's some practical things that I want to bring into your life. It's called setting boundaries. How do you set boundaries in your life? Exactly. A lot of young people don't know how to set boundaries because our culture does not set boundaries. I am taking a message that I heard 10 years ago, and it just so impacted my life that I've been sharing it to every single youth generation that I've been able to steward and cover. It's from Andy Stanley. It's called Guardrails. You can go on YouTube. You can go watch all of it. But you know what? My version of it is right in front of you right now. So go check it out later if you want to learn more about it. But here's the main idea. Can we get a picture of a guardrail? If you don't know what a guardrail is, if you're starting to drive or you haven't driven yet, or if you're riding in a car, you probably know what a guardrail is, but let's do a picture of a guardrail anyway. It's the metal thing that is like along the edge. You find guardrails along the edge, or you find guardrails in the middle of two roads. Yeah, so here's one. Yeah, so it's right on the edge. It's right on the edge. It's a little bit on the inside, and it's just there. It just keeps you driving, right? From drifting into a dangerous place or into an off-limit area, okay? So Andy Stanley defines guardrails as a system designed to keep a vehicle from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas, and you find them on bridges, you find them in medians, you find them in curves. Now, what is the purpose of a guardrail? It is two things. Number one, to direct us and to protect us. What is it again? To direct us and to protect us. And notice that a guardrail is not necessarily placed in the dangerous place of a cliff. Like they don't put the guardrail in the middle of a cliff to try to catch the car. No, what they do is they place the guardrail in an actual safe place. And so you lose a little bit of drivable road, and you place it in a place where it is able to keep you from going into the dangerous or the deadly place. Okay? So a guardrail is set inside the safe zone to keep you out of the danger zone. Okay? Okay. I think that makes sense. That's kind of obvious, right? Like, I've seen a guardrail. Okay, I get it. But here's why it matters. It's because if you think about a guardrail, I know some of you are just starting to drive, but if you bump up against a guardrail, it actually does damage your car. If you're driving along a cliff and you drift off and you start hitting a guardrail and you turn back onto the safe place, your car is still damaged, but it is not destroyed. It is damaged, it hurts, but it doesn't destroy you. It doesn't totally derail you, okay? That is why we need to have guardrails, because in our life, on the road of life, metaphor, on the road of life, if you don't set up boundaries in a safe place, you will eventually, just by living life, you might stray a little bit, you might fall a little bit, you might start looking over here and going over there in the wrong place, and all of a sudden, boom, if you have a guardrail, it will say, boom, nope. Get back over here. You start saying like, I want to serve God. I'm not going to get into a wrong relationship. I'm going to serve God all the way. Oh, she's cute. Boom. If you have a guardrail, bam, it can be like, oh, no, over here. Because if you don't do that, you end up making out in church. That just hypothetical. So You need to get a guardrail system set up in your life in the safe place. Here's an example of it. So there's a guy called Billy Graham. He's an amazing evangelist. He died a few years ago, and he was the most successful evangelist in American history, all right? And he had such a high character that he didn't just intend to do the right thing. He didn't just want to do the right thing. He didn't just come to an altar and say, I'm going to serve Jesus, and then walk away and do dumb stuff. He set up in his life a guardrail specifically with a woman. He said that I will never be alone with a woman. Never. Never in a car, never in an office, never in a room, and he would never let himself be alone with a woman. Why is that so important? It's because he was setting up a guardrail. Is it wrong for him to ride in a car with a woman? Not necessarily. That's not wrong to be in a car. It's not wrong to be in a room alone with a woman. However, it gives the appearance of evil, and also it opens up the door to go further. It's dancing on the edge. Can you see this? This is kind of like a guardrail, all right? So they put up a little barrier before so you don't fall off the stage, all right? You know what being alone in a car is? Dancing on the edge. You know what talking on the phone every single night, late into the night with someone that's not your wife? It's dancing on the edge. It's going too far. Emotionally, you might be already over the edge. And so you have to set up a boundary so that you at least bump up against it before you fall to your death or destruction. And that's what you need to do in your life. Set up boundaries. The world doesn't set up any boundaries. You know what the world does? The world says stuff like, drink responsibly. So yeah, they say like, alcohol? Yeah, I mean, it can be dangerous, but if you're responsible with it, you'll be fine. What is that? That's like saying it's not wrong to drink, but the only boundary they give is responsibly. What is that? You have to set a standard. What about with sexual boundaries? The world will say, don't have sex until you're ready. That's what the world says. Until you're ready. Until you really love the person. That's what Britney Spears said like 20 years ago. Just have sex when you're really, really ready. What does that even mean? Or when you really love the person. That is not the boundary that God sets. God says sex is reserved for inside the boundary of marriage. And the world will say stuff like, well, just when you're ready. See, they don't have the boundaries that God has. And God says in Scripture, don't remove the ancient boundaries. He wants you to be in boundary because that's where you're safe. That's where you can flourish. That's where you can have complete freedom and protection and run for the things of God inside the boundaries that He gives to you. He doesn't give boundaries to you to restrict you. He gives boundaries for you so you can start moving in true freedom. Did you know that children in a playground, they found this is true, that if they just put a kid's jungle gym out in an open field and they throw some elementary kids, go ahead, have fun, kids. When they're out there, the kids are actually, if there's no fence or boundary around it, they will start looking around like, is this okay? And they'll play, but they're always looking up. And it creates a place of anxiety because they don't know if anyone's going to encroach upon their safe space. They don't have one. And so when they set up a fence, when they set up a boundary, the kids could focus on the things that they were supposed to do, the thing that brought them most fulfillment and joy and happiness. They were able to do that within a boundary, a clear boundary, because it kept things from coming in and it kept them from the ability to know how far can I go. And that gives you a place of safety, living within the boundaries. And you can't look at the world for boundaries because they'll set their boundary off the cliff. God says to live within His boundaries. And so what Andy Stanley is talking about in Guardrails, and this is the most important part, is you have to set your boundaries somewhere on the side where it's not quite dangerous yet. So when you bump up against it, you'll feel it in your conscience. You have to so internalize this boundary before the cutoff point. Set your boundary here before you get to the place where you can actually fall off. What's an example of this? Billy Graham saying, I will never be alone with a woman ever. So I took that quick example. It's going to cost you to set up these boundaries. I was going to go, I was on the island of Maui. There's a thing called the Maui Invitational, and they would bring in all these different colleges, D1 schools, top schools, and they would all play in a tournament on Maui, and everyone wanted to go. It's just amazing, game after game after game after game, and someone gave us tickets, and so my college pastor that I was with, he couldn't go, so his wife was going to go, and then he gave me his ticket, and so it's a long drive to work from where we were, and she looked at me and she said, like, do you want me to pick you up? And I, because of my guardrail standard of the boundary before the boundary, I'm friends with the pastor, I'm friends with her, we're co-workers, there is nothing that could ever happen. However, we did not ride together to the Maui Invitational. You know why? Because I had a personal standard where I set a guardrail. I will never be alone in a car with a woman. And so, to protect her marriage and to protect me and the appearance of everything for the ministry. So I asked somebody to use their car. Actually, they offered my car to me. So one of the other staff members offered me their car. I didn't have a car. I was really, really poor. And I didn't have a car. And so I borrowed somebody else's car. While driving there, on the way, following this person that I could be in her van and be safe in her van riding with her, as I'm following her in my own car to the same place, she goes through a stoplight. I stay at the stoplight. The stoplight changes green. I go forward. I look at the shopping center over here. The car in front of me stops in the intersection for some reason. By the time I turn, I already had hit the car in front of me. And then we pull off to the side, and I'm in a daze, and I'm like, oh my goodness, just got into an accident. I can't believe this. My friend, by the way, is already at the invitational, just moving forward. Anyway, so I get out of the car. This guy, he's in a truck. He's looking at me, and he goes like, hey, my bumper's fine. I'm just going to head out. And I'm like, yeah, but shouldn't we just call the police? And so I wait for the police to come, and they do a report, and then I end up getting a ticket, and because I was the one who hit him, even though he stopped in the middle of the road. I was looking left. So anyway, I ended up having to go back to the person whose car I damaged. I missed the whole tournament, and I said, hey, I just got into an accident. She's like, seriously? And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, oh, no. And I'm like, hey, how much is your insurance? Like, you can pay like $1,000, and then it covers all the damage. And she goes like, I only have liability insurance, which means that they only pay for somebody else's stuff. All her stuff I had to pay for out of my pocket. And so I had to pay, get this, $4,000 to fix that car. Even though we were going like 10 miles an hour, I had to pay $4,000 to fix that car. It cost me, you know what that is in youth pastor money? That's like $100,000. It was all my savings, all right? It was all my savings. And I had to do, what? And so I'm thinking in my head, and I go to my youth pastor at the time, and I go like, I can't believe this happened. And he goes like, you know what? I know it's a lot of money, but he said, $4,000 is a better price to pay than for you to cross boundary lines that you know are wrong inside your heart. And it keeps you safe, because it's better that you break your car and give money than it is to pay the cost of a broken marriage or mistrust or the appearance of something that's not right. And now, today, I wish I had the $4,000 back, but that lesson that I've learned, it's so true. And so now I set standards and boundary lines. My wife, she knows that I won't ever be alone in a car with another woman. She knows that if I'm ever going to meet with somebody, it's going to be in an open area. And it's because that standard has allowed us to have safety and trust, and we are able to have most freedom. She doesn't call me up and say, what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing, what are you doing? Prove it, take a picture of where you are right now. Prove where you are, We don't have to do that. We don't live in that suspicion. We don't live in that fear. We don't live in that anxiety. We live in freedom. Why? Because we live within the boundaries. And we don't just live right on the edge. We live a little before the edge in the safe place and set up a guardrail. This is my close. Can we get the closing moment? I want you to think about things. How can you set up a boundary? When it comes to social media, what's over the edge for you? The things that you look at, the things that you post. Where do you draw your line? Who do you follow? What pictures do you like? Your messaging. Where do you draw your line? Direct messaging them, and when they direct message you, where do you draw the line? When it comes to your spending time with people, where do you draw the line? Where is the edge? if you're spending time with somebody like of the opposite sex and you're like interested in them, how do you draw the line of where it gets, it's in the safe place, but then now it's going over? How much time do you spend talking together? Is it within boundaries? How late at night are you talking? Is it within boundaries? The topics, the things that you talk about, the deep things of your heart, is it within boundaries, or do you just give it freely and then wonder when things crash and get destroyed? I know some young people, they didn't even like each other romantically, but because he stayed at her house over and over and over again watching TV, one night they stayed up really, really late and they ended up crossing a physical boundary and they ended up getting her pregnant. And they have a child together, but they never got married because they didn't actually like each other that way. They just walked away from their relationship. That's a dangerous place to be. He was in church leadership. He had to step away for a while. Am I saying that you can't ever get restored from mistakes? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is start living wisely. So many young people, I want to be the example. I have the call of God on my life. I want to live for the purposes of God in my life. I believe you. God believes you. But you need to set up some boundaries. You need to set up some practical things, because one emotional decision, even if your heart truly and authentically desired it, without proper boundaries, you will drift into dangerous places. And if you don't set up a guardrail, the only warning you will have is that you're falling and it's too late to stop it. Let's close right now in prayer. I want you to think. This is why I wanted your parents to be here. What boundaries do you need to set up, and where do they need to be? Have a conversation with them. Have a conversation with your parents about the areas of your life, how to keep yourself in a safe place. Talk to God. If you don't have parents that you can talk to God. If you have church leaders, that would be also good. Talk to them as well. Set this up. Set up a new standard before the dangerous death place, and make it so a part of your conscience that when you bump up against the guardrail, it's as if you're actually falling over the cliff. If you do that, you will live in safety, you will live in freedom, and you will find yourself moving to the place you said you wanted to go. As an example, in your speech, in your conduct, in your purity, and in your faith. Let's close in prayer. Dear God, I thank you for what you're doing in our lives. Give us wisdom, give us power, give us your ability to understand, give us discernment, and give us the practical commitment of setting a boundary in our life. That's how we're going to see real fruit and real life in our lives. Make us live like trees planted by the rivers of living water, water that flows, water that has a bank, water that has a boundary. Don't let our lives become swamps. I pray for the young person listening that they make the decision today to already cut off the things that they know are wrong. If you're living outside the boundary lines of God and you're thinking, I haven't really felt any consequences yet. I look at the wrong things. I'm talking to the wrong people. I'm doing the wrong things that I know is not right, but I haven't really had any consequences yet. The consequences are coming. The harvest is coming. You need to get out of that and say, God, I repent and I move into the safe place of your boundaries today. You do that and you will see your life flourish. That's the desire of us here at Redemption Youth, and that's God's desire for you. We love you. We'll see you next week. Talk to your parents, write those boundaries down, and live in true freedom. We'll see you guys next week.